Hi, welcome to my latest video. Today we're going to be looking at brake upgrades on the Freelander 2. This is the 2.2 diesel Freelander 2009 XS model. This video is going to be mainly focusing on the rear brake upgrade. There are already lots of videos on YouTube showing the front brake upgrade. Before I show you how to do the rear, let's have a quick look at the fronts. I've already upgraded the front brake discs on this car. The diesel model and this vehicle had originally 300mm vented discs on the front, so 300mm diameter. And I've upgraded this to the slightly larger 316mm diameter discs fitted to the petrol models. So the 2 litre and 3.2 litre petrol Freelander 2s had slightly larger front brake discs. They also had rear vented discs rather than solid. We'll look at those shortly. So what I did to upgrade the front brakes from the diesel smaller discs to the larger petrol discs was to buy some of these. Okay, so these are known as the caliper carrier, and you need slightly different ones which are hold the caliper slightly further out, allowing for the slightly bigger disc. The caliper itself and the pads are exactly the same, so you need to buy new discs and new carriers. The carriers are available on eBay. I'll post some part numbers in the comments to this video. The discs I bought from MTech. I went for the grooved cross-drilled type, and you can see here I'm running 25mm hub-centric spacers on here because I've got the large BF Goodrich all-terrain tyres. It just moves the wheel very slightly further away from the shock absorber. Now I'm not going to show the fitting of these brake discs. As I say, there are other videos available on YouTube showing how to do that. Very, very simple to fit these. You undo the caliper here using I think it's a 7mm Allen key underneath this dust cover. You take the caliper and the pads off, removing these springs first of all. Undo the carrier bolts, the bolts that connect the carrier to the hub. Down here they are very, very tight, so you'll need to use a long breaker bar. I forget what size they are, I think they're 15mm, but do check. And put the new carriers on after obviously fitting the new discs. So the discs are very easy to fit. You take your wheel off and your wheel nuts off and undo the brake disc retaining screw, which is a TX50, Torx 50. Remove that. Once all of this is off, you just pull the old disc off and put the new one on. There's nothing more to it really. Reassemble with the new carrier, same caliper. Obviously put new pads in. If you're putting new discs in, it would be not a good idea to run old pads with new discs. And then put it all back together. Very quick, easy job to do. You're probably looking at no more than an hour per side to do that. The crucial thing is that you can undo these bolts. The first time I attempted it, they were so tight I couldn't get them undone, so I got this long breaker bar on it, and eventually they came undone. Check the torque wrench specifications for doing them up. On the rear they're 110 Newton meters. Might be different on the front. Check the Haynes manual for those. So that's the front. Easy to do. Have a look on YouTube for other videos showing how to do that. This video is going to focus on upgrading the rear brakes. I will show you how to change the rear discs from the solid to the vented type, and fit the new wider calipers and carriers, and also change the handbrake shoes, renew the handbrake shoes, which is a very, very fiddly job. So we'll do all of that in this video. I'm going to put the front wheel on now and take this down off the jack, and then we'll jack up the back end and look at upgrading the rear brakes. This is a diesel Freelander 2, so we've got the solid disc, not the vented disc. I'm also running these wheel spacers here, these hub-centric wheel spacers, just to sort of push the wheels out slightly. We've got a standard type of caliper here, and I think those are factory sort of Land Rover brake pads. So what I'm going to do is swap this disc for the vented type, same size, but it's the vented type that's fitted to the petrol engine Freelander 2, in particular the 6-cylinder, the i6 straight 6 petrol has vented discs, just because it's a more powerful engine, faster vehicle. Land Rover felt the need to put the vented discs in. So what I'm going to do today is change the calipers, because they need to be wider, discs for vented discs, cross-drilled grooved vented discs, new pads. I'm going to put Mintex pads in, and also need to change this piece of metal here. This is a sort of bracket, it's known as the caliper carrier, and that needs to be wider too, so that this gap here is larger to take the thicker discs. Okay. So let's have a look at what I'm going to be fitting. These are the discs, same size, same diameter as the standard solid factory Land Rover Freelander 2 diesel discs. These are the vented type, as fitted to the petrol engine Freelander 2, and I've gone also for grooved and cross-drilled type. This just helps with water dispersion, it helps keep the face of the pad nice and fresh. I'm already running similar discs to this on the front, and they work very well, so I've gone for the same on the back. Here are the other parts. So these are the vented type calipers, so they're extra wide calipers. I'll put the part numbers of these, and I'll link to the discs in the comments to this video. These are the same as the normal diesel ones, just slightly longer in this distance here. That's all it is, as far as I know. The piston might be slightly larger, I'm not sure. These are the caliper carriers. I've just given everything a spray. They come in a sort of silver finish, which is not actually silver paint, it's more just bare metal. It's got a sort of slightly oily coating, and they'll rust very, very quickly. So I have decided to go down the boy racer route and spray them red. I just think that'll look quite nice as well. I'm thinking of fitting some black wheels with the red calipers underneath. That'll look quite nice. These are the carriers. They have these sort of floating pins which allow the caliper to, now let's see how it works. That bolts on, the caliper goes like that, and that sort of slides like that, because these calipers only have piston in one side, so they have to move as they grip the disc. They have to slide about. There's a floating caliper, as it's called. Okay, so these have the slightly larger cutout there. Again, I'll put the part numbers in the comments. These are TRW calipers. These I think are genuine Land Rover. No, they're TRW as well. TRW. They make the sort of aftermarket brake parts. Disc support from MTech. Calipers were about £70 each. Brackets were, I think about 25-30 quid for two, and the discs were, oh, I don't know, something like about 100 quid for two, something like that. It's worth mentioning as well, insurance. Okay, so I've contacted my insurer and I've notified them that I'm running uprated brakes. Best not to take a risk on this, because if you ever had an accident, they'd look at these and they go, well, these aren't standard. Anything to get out of paying out. So I've let them know it was uprated brakes. Didn't actually have to pay any extra money on the premium though, because this size of disc is a factory option. It's fitted to the petrol engine ones. I know that they're not grooved and cross drilled, but these calipers, this brake setup with this size of disc and this sort of size of caliper is something that the factory do fit to some models, and because of that the insurer said there was no increase in the premium. But it's noted on the policy, got uprated brakes and a few other modifications that I've done, like spotlights on the roof, things like that. Always best to play safe with that. Okay, what we're going to do now is start undoing some things here. So I'm going to undo this nut here, holding the lock nut with a spanner, undo that, and the bottom one. Caliper off, that's this piece, not this piece. This piece here will come off, pads out, and I'm just going to support that caliper there for now. We're going to be replacing the caliper, but I don't want to remove the caliper just yet, because we're going to have to break the hydraulic circuit, and I just want to minimise fluid loss. So we'll do that sort of right at the last minute. Once the caliper's off, these bolts down here will be undone. They're going to be very, very tight. I know, when I did the front, they were incredibly tight. I had to get a very long sort of breaker bar like this one here on them to undo them. Once all of that is removed, then I need to remove the spacer here, this wheel spacer. There's a retaining screw on the disc. Now the Haynes manual says remove the caliper, undo the handbrake, slacken the handbrake off, and then undo the retaining screw. Well, the disc is going to spin when you try and do that, and there's no way to stop it. So undo the screw before slackening the handbrake off. And then once the disc screw is loose, you can remove it. It's purely a retaining screw for the disc. The disc is held on by the wheel, in this case the spacer. It's not going to go anywhere, but every manufacturer I've ever seen always puts a little retaining screw in. They have a habit of rusting. I've had to drill them out before, but I'm hoping this one will come out pretty easily. Then the handbrake slacken off, disc off, and then we'll have a look at the handbrake shoes, which are actually inside here. This is actually a drum disc combination. So you have this pad, the pads here is a foot brake, and inside there are some shoes which push out onto the inside of this piece. This piece is the drum. Okay, so I'll renew those at the same time. Okay, so now I'm undoing the caliper bolt here, holding this piece here with a lock nut, with a spanner on the lock nut. Okay, undo that and the one lower, and then this caliper will come off with the pads. Okay, now I've undone these two bolts holding the caliper on. Push the pads back in slightly by hand and pull that off. Now what I'm going to do, just pop that there for now. I'm going to get a piece of string, tie that up here just to support that so it's not hanging on the brake hose. Here are the pads. Can't actually get that. Yeah, there we go. Not much left of those. About 2 millimeters. I think these actually, judging by that green, these are actually EBC green stuff pads, which I put in at about, just after buying the car, 30,000 miles. The car's now got 135,000 miles on. So they've done well, over 100,000 miles out of those. But I think on any car, the front end does most of the braking. so they've certainly lasted well. Get the other one out. Yeah, EBC, brilliant stuff. These are sort of fast road pads. They do make a lot of dust, which is about the only bad thing about them. They've served me well, and now it's time to replace them. I'm going to replace them with Mintex pads this time, just to see how they compare. Right, these little shims here come out, we need to keep those. Don't think the new pads come with those, so keep those. Now it's time to remove this caliper carrier with these big, very tight bolts here. I'll get the breaker bar on those, get those reduced. Remove this carrier here, caliper carrier. So I've undone these bolts. They weren't quite as tight as I thought. Still needed the breaker bar, but they undid quite easily. So undo those. And there's another one lower down which I've already taken out, and that comes off. Okay, so you'll notice the gap there for the disc is a lot narrower than on the new ones. Okay, now we can remove the disc drum combination. I need to slacken off the handbrake first. Get this hole here probably about a centimetre lower than that point there, and then move it that way so that you're turning it that way. There's a small knurled nut inside. You have to get a flat base screwdriver and flick it towards the back. That's now loosening off. Okay, the drum is off. Bit of a game getting it off. Had to wind that right as far as it would go and slowly wiggle the drum, bashing the drum off. The reason it wouldn't come off is because of this lip here, the groove that the handbrake shoes have worn over the years. But that's now off. Handbrake shoes are pretty worn, so I'll replace those. What I'm also going to do now is inside the car, I've adjusted this nut here. Okay, so I've removed this cover, so this cover just pulls out. Mine's quite loose because there were meant to be two clips there which have broken off, so yours might be more difficult to pull out, but you just basically sort of pull that out, and then this is a 17mm spanner, and undo that, sending it in that direction to slacken everything off. So what we then find is that the end of the handbrake cable has a bit of play in it. Okay, so it has some slack in it. Once you get to that point, then you can start pulling these springs off. So there's a spring here. This is the sort of longer, thinner spring, and then that one down there is a slightly chunkier, shorter spring. So those need disconnecting. The hooks on the ends need disconnecting, and then the shoes should be able to be removed. Okay, so I'm giving everything a bit of a clean up with this. This is just Wynn's brake and clutch cleaner. Sort of get rid of the brake dust. It's not really degreasing, it's more just getting rid of the dust because I don't want to breathe that in. It also smells nice. Right, okay, let's see if I can get those springs off now. There's one. Okay, that's the longer, thinner one. Now this other one might be more difficult. Up behind. Right. Okay, so this one I'm going to have to get a screwdriver or something and prise that back through there. It's not quite as easy to remove as this one. That adjuster actually really loose now, and it can come out, so you can see how that works. You can see, turn, that is just a threaded shaft, just a screw that threads in. When you turn this, it adjusts that end goes in or out. Okay, wind that right in, ready for refitting. Put that aside. Okay, right, I need to try and get this other screw out, this other spring out rather. Try that. I'm going to go get a screwdriver and see if I can prise that back up through there. So I was looking at this, wondering why these shoes are stuck solid, and it's because of this. These clips. There's one there and there's one underneath as well. They're sort of, I think they're called R clips. So they just need drifting out. Oops. Right, there's one. See if we can get the other one out underneath. Okay, so I'll remove the other one. There we go, that's a lot more looser now. So I'll pop the other one out and then should be able to hopefully just pull all these off and see what it looks like. Okay, so that other clip underneath is gone. Still can't get this spring back through, but what I have been able to do is, by carefully levering that there, is get the end of the shoe, there we go, over the handbrake adjuster. There we go, right, that's the shoe off. So I actually moved the end of the shoe, this bit here, that notch there was sat in there, so I just sort of moved that, prised that kind of up over there, and that's all kind of dropped apart now. Let's get the other shoe off. There's the other shoe with that spring. Keep that safe. Okay, that's that. These are in a pretty bad state. You can see there's cracks and things on those. These are ready for the bin. There's that. So that is the adjuster. Which I'll make sure is well lubricated when it goes back in. But just for now, I'm just going to leave that on there, just so I remember exactly which way round it goes. I'll give this a bit of a clean up. That is there's a sort of pin there for the adjuster. It's actually meant to be loose. It's slightly alarming that seeing that bent like that, but it is loose. That's just a pin that the R clip goes on. Okay, right, ready to clean this up and start reassembling with the new shoes. Okay, I've given that a good clean with brake cleaning fluid and scrubbed it with a wire brush, and then just given it a thin spray with some WD-40 just to stop rust and just kind of keep everything nice and clean and shiny in there. So, time to reassemble the rear brake shoes. These are the ones that I've got, Brake World, possibly made by TRW because there's some TRW grease in here. I'll actually give you some new bolts as well. I don't actually know what they're used for. Possibly caliper bolts. There's a lot of them here. No instructions, so who knows? Very, very similar to those two small bolts there, which I took out of the caliper. So if they are the same, I'll replace those. So that will use 4 of these 8 bolts. This, I'm guessing, is copper grease or something, or high temperature grease. Yeah, okay. So, right, so I need to work out, are these all exactly the same? Or is it a left and a right, or an up and a down? They look exactly the same to me. Can't see any difference there. That one got a chunk out of it. A bit annoying. Should still be okay to fit though. Yeah, so they are the same. So that means the top and bottom are the same. Let's just have a look at the old ones. Yep. Now those have got Land Rover logo on them, so they are genuine original Land Rover, actually made by TRW. Yeah, okay. Well, they look the same, which is the important thing. Can't see any difference at all between the old and the new. So I shall put 2 of these back in the box. Pull out one packet of grease and attempt to reassemble this. I'm going to need both hands, so I'm going to have to stop filming and I'll hopefully get this reassembled and then show you what it looks like. I'll reassemble. Now this is notoriously fiddly, just to get the ends of these shoes onto that adjuster. So what I've done here is I put the spring, the shorter, thicker spring, between the 2 shoes off the car. Actually got the spring there between the 2 shoes, and then carefully with this sort of lever mechanism, this bit here already on the end of the cable, I've positioned the lower shoe so that it is located into the end there. The top one is not located, so what I'm going to do now is carefully lever this top shoe up over the end of the lever mechanism here, so that the end of the shoe sits onto this piece of metal here. Now I'm going to use both hands for that, but that's the only way I can see to get these located. Trying to put them on and then attach the spring afterwards just doesn't actually look possible, because this spring is behind the shoes, so there's just nothing, there's no access, there's nothing to grab onto to pull the spring. So the only way to do it is to get the spring on first and then lever the ends of the shoe. So I've located the bottom shoe first, and then I'll prise up the top shoe against the spring and locate it into the top of the cable mechanism. Okay, so I've got the end of this shoe on there. It was very, very fiddly. A little trick, put something like this bar here, and just lever up a bit, and then if you press down on this end, it will lever that end up, and then you can just pop that in somehow by pushing that back in. It is the sort of job where you need 3 hands, but I've managed to do it on my own here. So that end is now assembled. I need to put the adjuster in with the other spring, and then I need to put these R-clip things in, which I need to get those little rods through those holes there. You can just about see that one just coming through, so that'll pick up there like that, ready for the clip to go on. Right, I'll do that, and then we are ready for the new disc to go over the top. Okay, right, this is in the adjuster and that spring. The shoes are there in place. I just need to refit this, or these two R-clip things. There's another one goes down the bottom, and they are very fiddly, even more fiddly than doing that bit at that end. The problem is you have to sort of somehow press them and bash them in. It's kind of almost a two-man job really, doing this on my own, so I'm trying to sort of press against them whilst then hitting with a hammer. I've tried about 20 times. I cannot get the thing on, but I shall try again. I'm sure I'll get it in the end. Okay, so this clip here is really difficult to get back in because you have to push it to close up the two pairs of prongs whilst trying to hit it in that direction, whilst holding the pin in that direction behind, otherwise the pin pushes back through. You really do need 3 pairs of hands for this, or an assistant, but I found a way to do this on my own. So first things first, take a large flat blade screwdriver, stick that down the back somehow to stop the pin from going back, and then you get some big pliers and just grip like that. If you squeeze there, it will push the clip together, and then you can just wiggle it on like that. So much easier than trying to press it and hit it in from every direction. Probably tried the first method about 30 times before giving up and thinking there must be a better way to do this. And then I just got my pliers by holding the pin from behind, either with a screwdriver or just put your fingers down there and push that pin as hard as you can in, and then by compressing the spring you can wiggle it on there underneath. Now if you're really struggling, the ends of the sort of top prongs there, you can carefully with some pliers just bend them very slightly. It just helps it to engage underneath the head of that pin there, and then wiggle it on and it's on. Right, I'm going to do the bottom one now, and then we're ready for the disc. Okay, so the bottom clip is on as well. Some people say this bottom one is more difficult than the top one. I actually found it slightly easier. What I did is just stuck a screwdriver in there, just wedged it in on the head of that pin, and then just got my pliers, compress the spring and wiggle it on, and it's on. Took about 10 seconds to do that one, and it's taken me about an hour to figure out how to do the top one. And they're both on now, so that is it. Everything's solid. Everything's nice and solid there. I'm going to need some adjustment, but I'll do that after the new disc is on. Okay, let's get the disc out, pop it on, put the new caliper on with the new carrier, and then I need to disconnect this brake hose. Rather than disconnect the hose up at the caliper there, I'm going to disconnect it carefully up there and replace this old rubber hose with a new braided stainless steel hose. Okay. Okay, so I'm now ready to put the disc on. What I've done here is very carefully sprayed the mechanism at that end and the adjuster here just with some copper grease. It's just a sort of spray can of 3-in-1 copper grease, being really careful not to get any onto the actual friction surfaces of the brakes. That will just help everything move freely and stop it seizing up. I've also, when this lever mechanism was off, I put some of that high temperature grease, this TRW grease, put a bit of that into it as well and worked it around. Brake parts do get very hot and dusty, so they do seize quite easily, so it's a good opportunity just to get everything moving freely. Saves the handbrake seizing on or not working or whatever. Right, ready to put this disc on now. So I need to line up this hole here with that hole there, which is for the little retaining screw. So I'll put that on, and then we'll look at putting the caliper on. Okay, so the disc is on. I've put this retaining screw in here. Not tighten that up really tight, it doesn't need to be really tight. The disc is held on by the wheel and the wheel nuts. As long as this is tight enough to sort of hold the disc whilst we adjust up the handbrake, that's fine. The worry is if you tighten it up really tight, it'll seize in there and rust, and then you'll never get it undone again. So that one's just sort of reasonably tight with a little bit of copper grease on the thread, so that can be undone in the future without too much trouble. Now I'm going to adjust the handbrake. So I've already re-tightened the nut inside behind the center console, so I've moved that nut back to where it was. Now on this side we need to turn the adjuster this way, okay? So I need to push the little teeth on it towards the front of the car. It's a bit fiddly finding them. They are in there somewhere. You might need a torch. Looking with a torch and find them. You'll know when you get them because you'll feel it click, and eventually the disc will stop rotating. Let's have a look and see if we can see in there. I don't know if the camera will focus in there. It's a bit too dark probably. Yeah, can't quite see. What you can do is use the screwdriver like that, move it up and down, and you'll feel the bottom and the top of the adjuster teeth. Now if you find that you can't move them at all, it might be that it's been wound in too tight. This is what I found the first time I tried to do this. I actually had to remove the disc again and just free off the adjuster because I'd wound it right to the end stop when I was removing the shoes. So I've freed that up now. So I should be able to... This is fiddly. You have to just keep at it, flicking that adjuster. You probably have to go quite far because it's been wound all the way in. So I'll keep at that until this disc stops rotating by hand. Okay, well, I think that is about it. Yeah, that won't rotate now. So now I'm going to go the other way. Back it off until I can just about move that by hand. Still a bit too tight. There we go. That's stiff. Okay, so it moves, it rotates, but it's dragging the disc shoes, dragging the shoes slightly. That's fine because we need everything to bed in and then readjust after the tension has been taken back up in the cable and the friction surfaces have sort of mated in with the metal surface of the drum inside. So it's going to take a few miles for that to really bed in, and then I'll readjust to get that absolutely right. Okay, it's good enough for now. Okay, let's look at the caliper. Right, so that's the brake caliper carrier fitted. It's the same left and right. You can see how this has a wider gap for the bigger disc. These bolts at the back, you need to tighten up to 110 Newton meters with a torque wrench. Haynes does say not to reuse them, but I don't have replacement bolts. I'm not able to get any easily at the moment, so I've had to just reuse the old ones, just clean them up, a little tiny bit of copper grease on the threads just to stop them seizing up, and then tighten those up to the specified torque. Now I'm going to actually fit the caliper on. So this is the caliper. It's got R for right hand. The bleed screw there points upwards, okay, so that air comes out of it. So that needs to go on there, and to bolt that on I'm going to use a couple of these new bolts that we've got with the shoes. Now it seems to be sort of pink or green. Guessing both of those have got thread lock on their threads. I don't think it matters which colour we'll use. So the other ones that came off look like they had a bit of green on them, so I'll use those two green ones. And I'll screw those in. 30 Newton meters for those. You need to obviously hold this lock nut here, stop it spinning on the guide, top of the guide pin, and stop that spinning, and then tighten those bolts there to 30 Newton meters. Okay. Before I put that caliper on though, I need to deal with the brake hose here. So what I need to do is carefully undo this and separate that up. Now, if you're not changing the brake hose, then you need to undo this here. Now, that's very difficult to do off the car. I would recommend that you loosen that off whilst the caliper is still bolted to the car. If you reach this point and your caliper is dangling like this, then you may want to just temporarily sort of bolt that on somehow without any pads fitted, just to kind of lock it in position while you undo that. Now, to undo any of these brake unions, you need special spanners. I've got a selection here. So these are 6-sided with a cutout. So the one up here is 11 millimeters, and what you need to do there is, rather than undo this all the way up the solid pipe, which you can do, but it's risky. If you damage that solid pipe, you've really got a problem. So just loosen that very slightly, and then prise out the clip. There's a clip, this clip, which was in there like that. So that clip was in there, which I've already pulled out. And once that clip is out, you can then, using I think it's an 18mm spanner, just with a normal 18mm open-ended spanner, you can actually undo that whilst holding this solid with the 11mm brake line spanner. You won't be able to turn this until the clip is removed. So it's really important to hold that one solid, stop it from moving whilst you undo the flexible hose. Now in order to do that, you've got to have the caliper off the car because the hose has to be able to spin. So work out before you do this which way you're going to do it. If you want to replace the brake hoses, then you need to undo that. If you don't, then you need to undo this. So this one down here is, I think it's a 14mm. Let's just see if we can rest that there. Yeah, so 14mm 6-sided open brake hose spanner for that one. I tried to undo that with that spanner and it wouldn't budge, so that's why I've ordered new brake hoses. So I'm going to be upgrading these standard rubber hoses to stainless steel high performance hoses. So I'm going to now split that. Now some brake fluid will leak out, but we're replacing the caliper, so I've got to bleed the brakes anyway. So when I do that, I'll just try and work as quickly as possible so as not to spill too much brake fluid on the ground. So, day 2. Last night I connected up the new caliper, not this one, this is the old one. I connected the new red caliper up with this new brake line. This is a HEL or HEL stainless braided brake line. Bought a set of these, are about £90, very expensive. Unfortunately, when I screwed that end into the new caliper, fluid was leaking. I don't know why. There is a lot of movement on this at the end. I did tighten it up pretty tight, but it just would not seal, and fluid was coming out between this nut and this black strain relief here. So what I'm going to have to do is use the standard hoses. Okay, so I don't need to split it here anymore, so I've done that back up. I need to put the clip back in. Okay, so that is currently slightly loose, but it is done up. And then I had the slightly daunting prospect of undoing this here, which I've tried to do before and was very, very tight. So what I did is use my 14mm brake hose spanner, put that over. So it's a 6-sided special strong spanner, and then it was really, really tight, so I pulled on that pretty solidly, and then just tapped the side of it there with a small hammer, and eventually it came free. Okay, so I'll keep that just tightened off for now, otherwise fluid's going to leak out. But the great thing is that I can now reuse that hose on the new caliper. So this caliper's only been bolted in here loosely just to hold it whilst I undid the hose, because it was virtually impossible to do it freehand, sort of in mid-air. So you can take that off now, bolt the new caliper on. Before I bolt it on, I need to thread it onto this hose. It's a mistake a lot of people make, actually. Put the caliper on and then find you can't turn the hose to do it up. So you need to do the hose up fairly tight, sort of do it up sort of tight, finger tight, and then bolt it on, and then when it's solid just nip the end up so that it's definitely sealed. Right, I'll do that now. Okay, so I've removed that caliper. Before I swap the hose onto the new one, I'll just hold this up so you can see the difference. So the red caliper is slightly wider sort of jaws on it, not by much, but enough to accommodate the extra thickness of the vented disc. Okay, right, I'll get that hose swapped over now. I'll get that caliper bolted on. Okay, so got the brake pads in. These are Mintex pads. They're the same type of pads used on the non-vented solid disc. Okay, the disc is the same diameter, it's just thicker. One thing I've noticed is these anti-squeal shims, which I took off the old calipers, won't fit. Okay, they're obviously too narrow, and they won't fit over the disc. I didn't get any new shims with the carriers or the calipers, so what I've done is just put a bit of copper grease on the back of the pads, not on the friction surface, just on here, and a bit sort of in the middle on the other one, just so that it stops the brakes squealing. If that doesn't work, then I'll have to try and find some of these shims on eBay or somewhere that are wider to go with the vented discs. Okay, right, I'm going to put the caliper on now and get that bolted in. Right, there we go. Okay, right, so I'll get that bolted in with these new two new bolts that came with the rear brake shoes, the handbrake shoes, not with the pads. So I'll get those bolted in, and then I need to remove this and well, tighten up, make sure this is tight, that's tight, put that clip back in, make sure the hydraulics are all tight, and then undo that, loosen the bleed nipple slightly, stick a bit of hose on the end into a jam jar with a bit of brake fluid in it, and get an assistant to pump the brake pedal whilst I bleed the brakes. Okay, right, calipers on. I've done up these bolts here, 30 Newton meters for those, 15mm socket and a 15mm open-ended spanner to stop the guide pin turning. One thing I found is when I went to loop the hose round here, it was getting kinked, so I actually had to take the caliper off again and spin it one rotation. So it's a good idea, bit of a tip is to put that hose, put the grommets into the bracket first. Actually looks like that one's not quite located. There we go. Put those in first before you bolt the caliper on. So I found I needed to rotate it once. And then up here, on these standard factory hoses, the piece at the bottom has to locate into this bracket. So I had to loosen that again very slightly, locate that, tighten that up. Once it's located, it stops this bit spinning. Tighten that up and then bash this clip in with the lip at the front pointing upwards. Just hammer that in and it holds it all. So there's no sign of any fluid leaking. Looks good. This is still loose because I haven't pumped the brake pedal yet. So I'm going to do that now. The pedal's going to be very spongy because there's going to be air in the system. And then I need to take off this little rubber dust cover somehow, if I can get a grip on it. There we go. Loosen off the bleed nipple, connect some hose and bleed out the brakes. Okay, it's done. Bled the brakes. So I've got an assistant to press the brake pedal whilst I loosened this bleed nipple here with a length of hose into a jar. Made sure that I topped up the fluid in the engine bay and pumped through a reasonable amount of fluid. To start with, there was just air coming out. There was quite a lot of air in there actually. Took a bit of pumping to get the fluid to come out, and then just did a few more, and now the brake pedal was really nice and firm and solid. I've checked the handbrake as well. That comes up about 3-4 clicks, so that's nice and solid. Now I need to do the other side, and then I'll take it for a drive, very carefully bed all of this in, including the handbrake, and then come back and readjust here if necessary, or possibly the adjuster inside the car. The one in the car does both sides at the same time, so take your pick which one you adjust. Some people recommend getting each wheel adjusted so it's just binding, and then adjusting the one inside to control how far the lever lifts. Right, I'm going to put the wheel back on now with the wheel spacers. Drop it down off the jack and the axle stand, and just see how that goes. Okay, I hope that video was useful. It's certainly been a difficult couple of days. It's a shame I couldn't fit the braided hoses, but we'll tackle that another time. At least I've got brakes that work now. So yeah, I'll put the part numbers for the calipers and the carriers in the comments of this video. The brake discs were bought from M-Tech, so I'll put a link to their website as well. I hope that was useful. Don't forget to click subscribe. More exciting videos coming soon. Thank you for watching. Bye.